mechanical idea. So where did this come from? So there's a historical reason why Schelling was trying to introduce. So when we think of games, we should not always think of games as two people trying to fight each other. There are also possibilities of cooperation. I'll give you some examples. So the idea came from the Cold War. During the 60s, 50s and 60s, the US and the Soviet Union were absolutely bitter enemies of one another. So they were trying to devise military strategies of trying to see which both of them were essentially playing a game of world dominance. And they were both trying to choose the right military strategy. So it seems like it was a zero-sum game, right? If Americans are better off, then the Russians are worse off, and so on. But there's partly so that this sort of went with the arms race. People started accumulating nuclear weapons and so on. But if you think about this game, it's not quite a zero-sum game, right? It's not that we don't want to destroy each other completely. We want to have world dominance subject to the fact that we're all living. Is that okay? So if you decide to completely wipe me out and I decide to completely wipe you out, it's bad for both countries. Is that clear? So there's some level of cooperation is also required. Think about, so that's one example. The arms race is an example of where this sort of theory can be used. Think about contracts. So the unions and the management, they talk to each other. When I got this job, I took this job in University of Waterloo. There was this negotiation between the guy who's offering me the job and me. So the way it goes usually is the Waterloo offers you a contract saying I'm going to give you X amount of dollars per year, and then look at that contract and say this is an insult. I cannot deal with X amount of dollars. I need Y amount of dollars. And then the Waterloo people would come back and say, what are you talking about? You are bankrupt, and so on and so on. And then they have to settle on a price, right, which is acceptable to both parties. That's how contract theory works, right? If you're bargaining with for example, if you're bargaining with your brother or sister for a piece of cake, you want to split the cake up and say, okay, I'm going to keep 80% of the cake, you take 20%. Then your brother says, no, why don't we split it 60-40, and so on and so on. Then you negotiate and finally reach a contract. Of course, it's true that the more cake you get, the less cake your brother gets, right? In that sense, it's zero sum. However, the more and more you haggle, the more and more you'll be hungry. So you want to try to get to an agreement as early as possible. That's the cooperative part. Is that clear? Yeah. So there is, in a lot of situations, we have partly it's zero sum, but partly we need cooperation. Let's think of other examples that we can apply game theory to. Auctions, for example. So if you think of auctions is a perfect example of exactly what I was talking about, right? So think about it. So let's say a painting is getting auctioned. So my happiness, of course, is whether or not I get the painting minus the amount of money I pay for it, right? Let's say that's my happiness. So my strategy is to bid for a painting, right? But my happiness does not just depend on my bid, but also on what you guys are bidding for the painting, right? So then in that sense, it's a game. So my happiness depends on not only my bid, but also on your bid, right? So there are various kinds of auctions that we see. I don't know whether you guys heard of different kinds of auctions. So there's a famous auction called the English auction, where, let's say, I'm setting up this piece of chalk. Yes? And so what the English auction is, people start bidding. So somebody says 10 cents, somebody says 15 cents, and so on and so on. Then eventually somebody says it, gives a bid, and nobody else overtakes it, and that guy gets his chalk. Yes, that's how the English auction works. The Dutch auction works in the exact opposite way, where the auctioneer shouts off a price of the chalk. So let's say I'm the auctioneer, I'll say $100 for a piece of chalk. And then there's silence. Then I say $95, then there's silence, and so on, and go on reducing the price. Till somebody raises their hand, I immediately sell my chalk to that person. That's what a Dutch auction is. So in English auction, the prices go up, right? And the Dutch auction, the prices go down. Is that okay? So in these different kinds of auctions, what should be a strategy? That's the question. That's the kind of question we'll try to answer today. Yes. Then there's something called a second price auction. We have a second price auction, where, so again, let's say we all write down our bids on a piece of paper. Let's say we're selling a painting or something. We all write down our bids on a piece of paper. submit it to the auctioneer. The auctioneer looks at those bids, gives the painting to the highest bidder, but the highest bidder only has to pay the second highest bid. Is that clear what I'm saying? So let's say I bid $100, you bid $90. Then I win the painting, but I only have to pay $90. Is that clear? That's what is called a second price auction. Then there's something called an all-pay auction, where we bid, and so again, I said I bid $100, you bid $90, so I win the painting, I pay $100, it's the first price auction, but you also have to pay your last bid, even though you get nothing. Is that clear? That is what's called an all-pay auction. Are you guys all with me? So there are different rules for different auctions. So the question is, what kind of strategy should you use? Have you guys ever seen an all-pay auction? I have seen all-pay auctions in my country. Let me give you an example of what an all-pay auction is. So let's say I'm a politician. So what happens in countries, what used to happen in countries like mine, things are getting better hopefully, is that most politicians were corrupt, right? So the way, so let's say I'm Coke and you're Pepsi, so what we both do is we both try to open a plant in this guy's neighborhood. So we both bribe the member of parliament. So I give some money without knowing how much Pepsi has given. Pepsi will give some money without knowing how much I've given to the MP. So one of us gets the contract, but the other guy has to pay the bribe. Right? So that's like an all-pay auction. So they are both paying. The highest bidder, the highest briber wins, but the second highest briber is losing money. That's the idea. So that's what an all-pay auction is. So the question is, what kind of strategy should we make? Think of other examples, like tax evasion, for example. Or littering. So it's not quite a game. Don't kill us, tax evasion is a game. But the idea is, so if you're a rational economic agent, every time April 30th comes up, you're thinking of whether or not to file taxes. So the question is whether it should file or whether it shouldn't file. The answer is that if you think that the rewards, if you don't pay your taxes, then you'll make a bunch of money, right, for this year. But there's a possibility that you'll get audited and your life will be miserable for the next 5 years, right? That's a trade-off. Is that okay? So if there is absolutely nobody auditing, if the government announces a policy that this year there will be no auditing, then it will be incredibly stupid of us to pay taxes, right? So the question, the way tax evasion problems work in game theory, for example. So let's say in my country, in a society that I live in, government has limited resources, right? And in the limited resources, government only can audit one person. Is that okay? Actually, it's a fictitious country, but government only has money to audit one guy. So I'm thinking whether to pay taxes or not. So the question is, if everybody else around me is paying taxes, right? Then if I don't pay taxes, then what happens? I'm the only guy that hasn't paid taxes, so I'll be audited with probability 1. You see what I'm saying? Is that clear? So in a society where everybody else is paying taxes, it's in my incentive, even though I'm not a government lover, I'll still pay taxes. Is that clear? In a society where nobody's paying taxes, and there are societies like those, then if I don't pay taxes, then I can hide in that crowd. You see. So the probability of me getting audited is 1 out of n, but n is the number of people not paying taxes, right? And if n is really large, I shouldn't pay taxes. I should just take that chance. Same thing with littering, right? So if I'm throwing garbage, if I eat my hot dog and dump my trash right on the street, of course, what do I gain? I gain the happiness by not walking up to the trash can. Yes. But what do I lose? The loss is the shame that everybody's going to stare at me and say, "What an idiot this guy is," right? But if everybody around me is an idiot, right? If everybody else is throwing trash on the street, yes, then I can hide in that crowd. You guys see what I'm saying here? Yes. So these sort of problems are sort of dealt with game theory. What are the equilibriums? Okay. There's this famous application of game theory in politics, where I'm sure you've heard of this, called the Hotelling's ice cream vendor problem. let me just quickly give you an idea of what that is. So let's say here's a beach of length 1. So starts here, ends here. And you can think of every point on this beach, there's a human being. So it's an extremely crowded beach where we are sort of lying next to one another. And every point represents a human being. Is that okay? And there are 2 ice cream shops that are planning to open up an ice cream shop. So the ice cream shops are identical in quality, there's no difference. So let's say I'm ice cream shop A, you're ice cream shop B. So I set up my shop here, you set up your shop here. Then another assumption is that the beach people are lazy. They're only going to go to the nearest ice cream shop. So all of these guys that are lying on this beach would go to ice cream vendor A, right? Because that's closer to ice cream vendor B. Is that okay? All of these guys will go to ice cream vendor B. And if you divide this half and half, these guys will go to A, these guys will go to B. Is that clear? Yeah. So the question is, so suppose I have to set up my ice cream shop without knowing where you're going to set up your ice cream shop. And you have to set up your ice cream shop without knowing where I'm going to set up my ice cream shop. Where should we locate our shops? That's the question. So first of all, before we do that, let's just make sure this is a game, right? So my profits, how much money I'm going to make, not only depends on where I set up my shop, but where you set up your shop, right? So that's the game in that sense. Are you getting that clear? So the question is, for example, if this is the setup, suppose I have set up myself here and you have set up yourself here, is this stable? Am I doing the best given what you are doing? No. Why? Because if I just take off my shop and go right next to you, then I'll get the entire market, right? Where I'm just getting this much of the market. Do you guys see what I'm saying here? So if I just uproot my shop and just move right to the left of you, then I'll get the entire market. So this is not stable. So I'll regret where I am, right? Given where you are. Is that clear? And you're going to regret where you are given where I am also. Is that clear? So what's a stable situation here? So one stable situation is that both of us are in the middle. You are here, I am here, right? So in that case, I get half the customers and you get half the customers. Is that okay? Can you do if I am here, can you do any better by moving? The answer is no, right? Because if you move, then suppose you decide to move here, then you're going to get all of these guys for sure, but you only get half of these guys, right? Which is less than half. Is that okay? So both ice cream vendors putting themselves in the middle is an equilibrium in this market. Right? Is that clear? What's this going to do with politics? So instead of thinking of ice cream, think of these as political views, right? So this guy is extreme left wing, Stalin or something, and this guy is extreme right wing, Milton Friedman or somebody, yes. And we're all and every point on this beach represents a political view of an individual. Is that okay? And I think of these ice cream vendors as political parties. So I'm a political candidate, you're a political candidate. We don't really have we are typical politicians. We don't really have our own views. We only get the maximum number of votes. That's all we care about, right? So what I'm saying is this is my policy, and what you are saying is this is my policy. Who are going to vote for me? People who are closer to me in policy than you. Is that okay? And people are going to vote for you. So it's exactly the ice cream vendor problem. Do you guys see what I'm saying? Yes. And what it says is that there's a natural tendency of unscrupulous politicians to come towards the center. What the equilibrium thing says. Is that clear? So there's always a tendency of politicians to come towards the center if they don't have any policies of their own. Is the idea clear? So that's what this is about. Anyway, so that was a long introduction. What's the introduction about this? So let's look at a couple of examples. Let's start with the typical games that we see.